So welcome everyone. So I'm not going to try to do. I'm not going to try to kick it off with an AI joke, but I'm going to kick it off with a weather joke, and I'm going to thank all our participants here from the East Coast and from outside of California for bringing us this nice weather today. Thank you. Welcome to the 2024 AI and Education Summit. We added 2024 this year because has now become an annual affair. For those of us who were with us last year, and many of you were, we had kicked off very quickly after the launch of ChatGPT this event. We saw the energy from last year continue building this community of practice over the past year, and then wanted to do another collaborative event with our great partners at HAI, and I will introduce Ahmad and we'll let him to speak more about the intent of the summit.
Thanks, Isabel, and always a pleasure to partner and collaborate with Stanford Accelerator for Learning. As Isabel mentioned, this has been an exciting time since ChatGPT and DALL-E and all the revolutionary foundation models have been added. Why this summit? Why are we doing it again? Why is this second instance? Mainly because everything has been continuing to evolve. We have not seen one foundation models, we are seeing maybe one every week now. So we would like to expand the community of problem solvers, find out how to have more impact of generative AI tools and AI tools in general on the education process in particular, and understand whether these impacts will be positive or negative and how to mitigate some of the risks. What can we do as a community? We would like to have as much conversations in the room today, and probably geared towards some community activities, seminars, applications to grants and programs, and maybe educational courses as well. Last year, when we hosted this same conference at Gates, again in collaboration with Isabel and her team, it was a fascinating event because we hosted almost 200 attendees. Today, we have almost double the number, 400 attendees, and we covered a lot of topics last year that were translated quickly into growing a community that applied to a joint seed grant that we organized and was used to fund over 16 projects that have been developing new ideas for AI and education over the year. Last year, again, in the same conference, just for fun, I imported this prompt into DALL-E 2 and got this image. And last night, for a change, I imported the same exact prompt into DALL-E 3 and got much more detailed, much more exciting, much more fascinating images for what this room would look like. I think now that I see the round tables, the new image on the right is kind of closer to what this conference looks like. Although Isabel promised not to do an AI joke, I had to do one. And again, because of all of these models, we have to have a structured way of evaluating and understanding what are the right metrics to assess the quality of any foundation model, whether it's being a language model or an image, to take a text-to-image model, for example, with Helm and Haim being projects that are being homegrown here at Stanford. And what are the use cases, what are the right metrics for different use cases being beyond accuracy? We need to think about bias and hallucination and toxicity and all the different metrics. Consequently, we want to focus today on how AI will change education from angles of the future of AI in education, the classroom impact, ethics and different practices, the impact on the market, and different use cases. Again, these images are created by DALL-E 3, and we would like to see if some of them are realistic or not in 10 or 20 years from now. To go through this, we will have a number of panels today, concluding at the end of the day with the same exact fireside chat that we concluded with last year, featuring Sal Khan and Chris Beach. Along the day, we will have speed talks that we would like to the speakers and the attendees to participate in as many as possible of these. And this year, we added new components, posters, and VR, AR demos that will showcase real applications of AI in education applications. With that, I turn it back to Isabel.
Thank you, Ahmed. So we are going to turn to two of the leaders behind this big effort at Stanford. James Landay, who is has many titles, but Vice Director and Faculty Director of Research at Stanford HAI, and has been a really true collaborator with us at the Graduate School of Education and the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. And I will also invite Dan, my very close colleague and boss and amazing visionary, Dan Schwartz. He, by the way, doesn't like when I say visionary, but I like it, so I continue calling him a visionary. I was specifically instructed not to say that he's a visionary. Yes. So Dan Schwartz has many titles as well, but two that are relevant for this conversation is the Dean of the Graduate School of Education and also the founder and the faculty director for the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. And one more personal word on Dan Schwartz, which I really love in his background. Dan was a teacher before becoming a professor and dean, and he taught in southern LA, in Kenya, for those who are international based, and also in Alaska. So very different settings of teaching. So really interesting background and an honor to work with James and Dan. So James, I turn to you. Thank you.
So we want to welcome on the part of Stanford HAI all the folks who have traveled to come and join us in this important event, as well as all our colleagues here from Stanford who are coming together on this. As was said last year, I don't know if we knew we were going to keep doing this, but it was so successful. People had a good time. We heard from many people how invigorating the day was and how many new people they met and new ideas that came up, that it was clear we should keep doing this. As Ahmed mentioned, we did a joint funding program that is funding a lot of projects here at Stanford that are doing AI in education. HAI also has its seed grant program as well as our larger Hoffman Yee program. And I noted when we just did our seed grants just a couple months ago that I think the education faculty, GSE faculty, had the highest success rate or near the top. Vanessa's going to tell me if I'm wrong, of all the different schools at Stanford in terms of their proposals being successful in that competition. So there's many GSE people who are funded directly by HAI or jointly with the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. We think education is one of the key areas where AI is going to make impact on the world. And there's all kinds of places that you can think about in terms of data science analytics to figure out what's happening and how to do better, or personal tutors and things like this that many of us are working on. But, you know, I'll try to quote the visionary Dan here. Dan gets quoted and then he can't remember if he actually said it, but I think he said something at this event last year where he said, one of the key things is that the changes that AI and foundation models are bringing to education is almost going to force educational reform, because how people are using these, there's no choice but to change. It may be a bumpy road for the next 5 years, but in 10 years, I think we're going to look back and see how systems have changed. And that change is going to allow some of the innovations that people are creating right here to infiltrate into these systems, as well as other great innovations that have been discovered in the learning sciences and proven, but have had a harder time getting acceptance just because of how difficult these systems are. I just came back a couple weeks ago from Davos, and AI was the topic on everybody's lips, and education was a subtopic of that a lot of people were talking about, trying to understand how is this going to change the world. It is going to change the world, and Stanford and our collaborators from elsewhere, this is the place for us to do this. So thank you for coming.
Okay, so Isabel, I will have my revenge. I'll think of where. So Isabel is the best party maker of all. So she put together this conference, and I'm very thankful for that. I'm also thankful for James and HAI and Ahmad and the team for, this is a big deal to get everybody here. So in education, we kind of knew AI was coming. We'd hear about disruption to the trucking industry and sort of smile, and then we hear about taxis. So we knew it was coming. We didn't know it was going to come this fast and this big. And I personally am excited by it. So the provost of the university came to me about a year ago and said, "What should I tell the board of trustees?" Because she knew they were going to ask. And so I told her, say that the dean of the Stanford Graduate School of Education, the best school of education in the world, because you never miss a chance to push product, right? You have to say that. Tell the board of trustees that he says this is the most exciting and important thing to happen to education in generations since we mandated high school. And then I went on to kind of explain that people take education for granted, right? As a system, they take it for granted until something goes wrong, right? And then they care a great deal. Here's something that just completely disrupted it. Suddenly, everybody has to check their assumptions about what you need to learn, how should you teach, right? What's it going to do to the workforce? This opens a space for tremendous breathing room, innovation, excitement. So I think this is a great thing. I do have a fear, which is that AI can be very good at automating the past. And so we may end up with becoming very efficient at doing some things we wish we didn't, right? And so this is a big concern. So what do you do about that? Well, you have a seed grant with HAI to try and get some of the most innovative minds working on the problems. So this was interesting. You do a seed grant, you post it, you hope you can find most of the faculty at Stanford. There's no email list that I would ever be allowed to use that reaches all the faculty. But you advertise it and you see who's out there, right? So as I understand it, this seed grant competition had the most applications of any seed grant competition ever at Stanford. We got applications from every school except the law school, which I still don't understand because they're going to be disrupted like crazy with ChatGPT. So we get all these amazing proposals, and HAI and the accelerator had to sort of say, let's put more money into it. There's just so much good here. So you get to hear a number of those speakers today. I also suggest you go to the poster session where you see student work, because they're the ones who are going to change it right down the line. So thank you all for coming. One of the things Stanford is very good at is convening, and Isabel is the super convener, which will now be your label forever. So anyway, thank you all for coming.
So we are now going to turn to our kickoff opening session, and I will ask our panelists to join me here on stage. We have Emma Bronskill, who is a Stanford computer scientist, also in charge of the AI for Human Impact Lab. We have Dora Demski, who is an assistant professor of education data science at the Graduate School of Education. Judy Fan, who is an assistant professor in psychology, and then Ge Wang, who is an assistant professor in the Center for Computer Research in Music and Acoustics, Department of Music, and by courtesy in computer science. So maybe I just wanted to say actually a few more words before we kick off with Emma. One is that those four amazing individuals have one common characteristic, which is that they are both affiliates of HAI, so very much into AI and computer science, but all four of them are also affiliates with the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. So very also knowledgeable and passionate about education. The second thing that I wanted to note, if it's not already obvious to you in looking at those four amazing individuals, is the diversity of this panel. And I thought I would actually emphasize it because this is something that I'm personally really touched and proud of, having so much diversity in our faculty. That's really representative of our broader population at large. But noting that it's not something that is always the case in our world of artificial intelligence. So thank you for being with us, and Emma, thank you for kicking us off.
Hi, I'm Emma Brenskill. I'm delighted to be here. So I'm a reinforcement learning researcher. I'm really interested in systems that can automatically learn from data to improve outcomes. And these are the types of algorithms that are critical to a lot of different systems today, including ChatGPT. So that was one of the key things, these reinforcement learning algorithms help to create the success of large language models. But I'm particularly passionate in how we can use the same types of ideas to enable data-driven, continuously improving education. And most of my work, together with a number of wonderful collaborators, has thought about this in the context of a human or student interacting directly with AI. So I'll give you just a simple example of this. This was a collaboration with James Landé and Sherry Wan and Alan Nee. So as many of you, particularly those with kids, might know, it is often challenging to get kids to engage with math. And so one of the insights that James had is to think about much more interactive types of narrative and engaging experiences. So in this particular artifact, what you can see is a student that's interacting with a narrative engagement quest where they're trying to support, trying to help save the world in this particular case, and they have to do math challenges as part of this. Now what you can see on the right is a little monster that is their helpful companion as they go along this quest. And I will note in this case that we allowed students autonomy to help pick and customize those monsters to help them feel more engaged and connected and supported in this journey. So this is pre-ChatGPT, but you can see a similar type of idea on the right, where what we're doing is we're trying to automatically learn from data the best way to interact with the student to help them learn and succeed. And so on the back end of this, we're using exactly the sorts of algorithms that ChatGPT also uses to try to be much more effective. In this case, what we were looking at is to try to understand how we could support student learning and outcomes by changing how the monster interacted with the student. And we did this both in an online way, where the system was constantly changing as we got feedback about what worked and what didn't work, as well as trying to distill those knowledges and to understand whether that would transfer to a new population of students. So one of the things that I think all of us were most proud of for this particular work is that it seemed to be particularly helpful for the students that most needed help. So what you see on this graph here is that we've clustered students into their performance on the initial pretest. And you can see that compared to sort of a more control setting, which doesn't have this adaptive reinforcement learning and doesn't have the monster support, this is particularly helpful at engaging and supporting students that were most struggling at the start of the study with the content we were teaching. And so I think this is really exciting because when we create AI systems, we want them to amplify everyone, but we particularly do not want to make just a rich get richer system and amplify existing inequalities. But as I've been thinking about this sort of work over the last few years, and in the event of COVID, I've really been thinking much more broadly about how we can have AI to support the whole learning ecosystem, and to really think about how do we engage and amplify teachers. So as a simple example of this, I'm going to talk about grading. We know for a long time that AI systems can help grade multiple choice questions. If we have something like the solution to 2 minus 10, it is simple and trivial, and this has been true for a long time, that we can do automated grading. But of course, we would like to go beyond these types of interactions for students and offer them training in the types of complex tasks that we think is going to be essential to the workforce of tomorrow. So this, for example, is the Bounce program. It is often a really exciting thing for new students learning programming to get to create their own video game. Now, one of the challenges with this is that if you actually want to understand if the student has created the right video game, you have to play it. They might accidentally create a lot of balls, or it might be that when they bounce, it does not score correctly. And so this is a big challenge because it takes around 6 minutes to grade one of these games. And that means an instructor actually has to play the game. And maybe that's fun for the first 6 minutes, but it's not so fun for the remaining tens, hundreds, or even thousands of games that people might have to play. So Code.org is an amazing organization that provides education in programming, and they have over 700,000 submissions on this task. But note here, they can't possibly have people grade all of this. That would take them over 4 years of grading. And so what they do is they offer these assignments without feedback. And if you think about the evolution of education and online sort of free access, we can think back to when MIT started making their lecture notes available online, to when we started to have MOOCs that could actually provide you with feedback, and how transformative that is to be able to actually have feedback in order for student growth to occur. And so what we wanted to think about is, well, how could we democratize access to these rich sorts of activities in a way that actually gives people feedback to allow them to learn? And the idea is that we want to use AI to play the game to evaluate its correctness. Now, I just want to highlight here, this is a little different than what we often hear about. We often hear about AI being used to learn to play video games, get human level performance on Breakout or Montezuma's Revenge or on AlphaGo, on the Go board game. But we're doing something different here. What we're trying to do is to have the AI play the game to understand if the environment is specified correctly. Does the bounce work? Does it score correctly? And this is quite a different task. And so what we do in this case, well, I'll stay on this for one more sec. What we did in this case is we started with some machine learning methods to try to understand if we could automatically create AI systems to play the game and be able to grade it. And this was published at one of the top machine learning conferences in our community, NeurIPS. And then we wanted to go beyond this, because in this first case, what we could do is give people binary feedback. We could tell them if overall their system worked or not. But again, we know that people most thrive when they get dense, detailed feedback about their performance and where they're struggling. And so together with a collaboration with Chelsea Finn and Evan Liu, we thought about using this as a meta-reinforcement learning task. Meta-reinforcement learning is the idea of learning AI systems that learn not just to do one task, but to do many tasks. And here you can think of that being used to understand all the different parts of the rubric of whether or not the student has encoded the task correctly. So we used innovations in how to do this in a very data efficient way. So we want to have reinforcement learning systems that can learn to evaluate these very quickly. And we showed now we could give people dense feedback. We could actually tell them about the individual parts of the game which they were doing correctly or incorrectly. Now, of course, ultimately, we want this to be effective for students. And so we wanted to understand if we could now use this to augment human teachers to make it more effective or even accurate for them to grade these assignments. So the idea now is that when the system plays the game, the AI agents play the game, they create little videos to highlight if the student seems to have made a mistake. Those videos can then be shown to a human TA or teacher in a way that hopefully amplifies their ability to quickly grade. We did a study in a Stanford course, and we found that this reduced grading time by 44% and improved accuracy. This is pretty impressive because Stanford teaching assistants are very good. And yet even they are human and we all make mistakes. And so we can see in this case, this sort of collaboration between the AI and the human is both reducing time and improving outcomes. So I think that I've been really inspired by thinking about this sort of collaboration and this co-orchestration. And that's something that we're more broadly thinking about in terms of AI that can support the learning ecosystem. I'll give just one more example of a much broader effort I'm involved with on this level. So I envision sort of a future of the classroom where you think of everyone having access to AI, all the stakeholders, both the students and the teacher, as well as administrators and others. And so we can think about a scenario where all the students might be interacting with a personalized learning assistant, but that we're also getting information about where they're struggling, where they're succeeding, and what support a human might be most helpful in providing. And so in these sorts of scenarios, you can imagine the teacher getting real-time information about whether Dora is doing great and we need to go congratulate her, whether Emma is struggling and I need additional support. And the thing that is most exciting to me about this is that we may just be able to do more with the same resources we already have. So can we amplify the human teacher just to help them be much more effective in understanding how to best spend their time and really support all the students that are most struggling? So this is an ongoing effort. It's part of a much broader effort to think about how do we double math performance for struggling middle schoolers, and to think about these kind of data-driven, innovative ways that we could combine human tutoring with AI tutoring. I think going forward, we have a huge potential to be able to move towards a future where we have this data-driven AI learning ecosystem to enable continual improvement and really allow all students to thrive. Thank you.
Thank you, Emma. we'll turn to Dora.
Hello, everyone. I'm Dora. And thank you, Emma, for sharing your really cool work. And we actually are collaborating on some projects that I'm really excited about. I'm going to talk about how we could use generative models and generative AI to empower teachers. And if you notice, last year I gave a talk with a very similar title. At that time, I mean, it's crazy that it was just a year ago. It feels like, it was yesterday, but a lot has happened since then. I was very starry-eyed. A lot of the discussion about the use of generative AI in education has focused on plagiarism and the way in which it's just totally disrupted how people think about student assessment and student submissions and all of that stuff. So it was kind of negative. And I discussed how that type of focus drew away attention from the critical positive potential of AI in education. For example, how it could support teachers and how it could analyze teacher-student discourse to provide, for example, professional learning to teachers as a form of an AI coach that could help students or help teachers practice teaching in simulated environments, help them provide real-time suggestions so that they can better respond to their students and give them feedback after they taught. And already at that time, I had some results from previous randomized controlled trials indicating that AI feedback could improve not just instruction, but also student learning in several different contexts. So a lot has happened since then. Now, the discussion about AI being used as a teacher support tool is no longer just a vision, it is a reality. A lot of teachers, as of even just last March, the Walden Family Foundation conducted a survey that showed that 40% of teachers are using ChatGPT on a weekly basis, and that number has definitely grown since then. For what type of things? For all types of things. Lesson planning, generating rubrics, writing emails to parents, giving feedback to students, all sorts of routine tasks that take up a lot of teachers' time. And there have been tools, new platforms like MagicSQL, CurryPod, EduAid, just to name a few, that have tried to tackle these types of challenges for teachers. It's really exciting. At the same time, a lot of these existing tools focus more on quantitative changes. Can we save time? Can we make teachers more efficient? Can we automate a lot of the very routine things like get them from a blank page to a draft of a lesson plan? That's really exciting, but at the same time, it's not really showing evidence for the type of qualitative changes that, for example, Dan Schwartz was mentioning. Can we actually see any signs of a real revolution happening? For example, education researchers have long called for focusing instead of knowledge transfer as the core of education on empowering students, giving them agency, motivating them, giving them authority, and supporting their identity and belonging in the classroom. Are we seeing any evidence of focusing now more on the learning process rather than its product in the form of, multiple choice quizzes or standardized tests? Unfortunately, I'm not yet seeing a lot of evidence for AI being used in these contexts, but I think there's a lot of discussion about that, and my work is also trying to address that qualitative change particularly. There are a lot of teachers and practitioners who do want those changes to happen, but they face a lot of challenges, including things like, how do I cater to each individual student's need? Like, I might have 10 kids who are multilingual, like 10 kids with special needs in my classroom, and it's just really difficult to cater to every student's need individually. I might have also, as a teacher, might have received a brief, often theoretical training about high leverage pedagogical practices, but how do I actually implement it in my real classroom with real students? It's much, much harder, and it takes a lot of time and a lot of experience and a lot of trial and error. And also, even if I did all, my best, I revamped all my lesson plans and everything, what do I do if my curricula and assessments are still flawed? And they're still kind of rooted in this previous view of focusing on the product rather than the process of learning. So my question is, could AI help address these types of challenges, these types of qualitative questions that would really lead to or have a potential of leading to a true revolution or reform in education? some of my work, and I'm not going to dive too deep into it, led by my amazing student Rose, has shown how ChatGPT and other types of AI tools off the shelf are not good enough in terms of providing teachers with pedagogical insights and expertise. They often give very generic, not very insightful feedback or comments because, I mean, how would they know it? The internet doesn't really have those types of pedagogical insights. So what we have been trying to do is trying to adapt these models in different ways so that they would be able to provide teachers with those types of really high quality pedagogical supports in their daily tasks. And I'm going to talk about 3 projects led by amazing students that try to tackle different areas of this problem. The first, led by my student Rose, is focusing on student-teacher interactions, specifically in an online tutoring platform for math, where oftentimes they recruit novices. They serve about 30,000 students, so they can't possibly scale that with expert tutors. We have found that the tutoring quality is oftentimes quite poor, and we are trying to help the novice tutors real time in remediating student math mistakes. Another project led by my student Riz is focusing on addressing the challenge of helping teachers individualize curriculum and lesson plans to students with different needs and backgrounds. So we take curricula and existing lesson plans and input, and the goal is to generate the types of scaffolds, like, the different types of exercises, or even translations for multilingual learners, and all sorts of adaptations that would help those students with different types of needs. And lastly, Project Teach Empowered, led by my student May, and also involving a lot of amazing other students. I only had room for 1 picture, but these are all team efforts. It's called Teach Empowered, and it's focused on helping teachers with giving feedback to students on their assignments. And actually both SCAFGEN, the middle project, and Teach Empowered are generously supported by AGI and the Stanford Accelerator for Learning. And in this project, we are trying to help teachers provide not just, any type of feedback, but really effective mindset supportive feedback to students on their assignments with the help of AI. I would like to give you a little bit of a high-level overview of our approach that covers, that relates to all of these different projects. How do you take these off-the-shelf methods like ChatGPT and adapt it to these tasks? And we started with something, the so-called cognitive task analysis. So we work with teachers, expert teachers who are trained in these high-leverage pedagogical practices and have lots of experience, and try to understand their thought process, which is something you cannot gain from the internet and surveys and all that stuff. You really need to break it down. We have all these different notes and flow charts and things like that, trying to break down their thought processes. And these are just a couple of quotes to illustrate what they're saying when they're talking through these decisions. For example, when responding to a student's mistake, a teacher might say, I first try to identify the cause of their error, that they misinterpret the question or make numerical mistakes. It will inform how I respond to them. Or in the case of student feedback, maybe I want to first celebrate some of their responses and then try to ask specific targeted questions to elicit a better response. So given these we do these cognitive task analysis with several expert teachers, and then try to create this type of guide that would help the model also follow these steps. Like in the case of remediation, identifying the cause of error, determining what strategy to use, and formulating an intention behind their response. So in this context, a tutoring context where the novice tutor just asks, Mike has 4 cookies and he eats 3 cookies, so Mike has blank cookies left. Then the student says Mike has 10 cookies left. Clearly that was a mistake. So the expert would say, oh, this seems like the student might have just guessed the answer. It doesn't seem like there's really substantial thinking behind that answer. And then we want to help the student use the right strategy to come up with an answer. So provide the solution strategy and help them understand with the goal of helping the student understand the lesson topic and solution strategy, which help the expert arrive at this answer. Great try. Let's try to draw a picture. Let's start with 4 cookies and erase 3 cookies that Mike eats. So I don't have much time. I'm going to skip through this, but there are different ways of then putting these guidelines to help improve the model performance, either by prompt tuning or scaling annotation and then fine-tuning the model. And for all of these different projects, we are trying to use these models to then create these approaches to create these new models that would then result in these tools that would take in like a conversation or curriculum materials or student assignments as input and provide outputs that would really represent those high leverage pedagogical practices. And these are not done in a vacuum. We are trying from the very start to partner very closely with school districts, practitioners, and with digital platforms that would enable not just scaling what we're doing, but really making sure that they're rooted in real data and real needs of users, of teachers, practitioners. And when we deploy these types of solutions, we do it in a kind of gradual fashion where we first do smaller pilots, maybe with just 10, 20 users, and then measure different things really like engagement with the tool, whether it has and shows any evidence of teacher practice, self-efficacy, and later on, we also do larger studies where we do like randomized controlled trials, for example, to rigorously measure what type of impact these types of algorithms can have on student outcomes. So, thank you.
Thank you, Dora. We'll turn to Judy.
Thank you so much, Isabel, and it's really wonderful to be here, and thank you all for attending the session. So my lab studies cognitive technologies. What I mean by that is all of the objects and devices that we use to support our thinking and how we communicate with other people. So let's take something as simple and familiar as the number line. Now, this is already a huge breakthrough, technological breakthrough. As the Spanish architect Antoni Gaudí once observed, there actually aren't straight lines anywhere in nature or sharp corners, but we created them anyway, right? And we didn't stop there. We extended the number line in a new direction a few hundred years ago to create rectangular coordinates, which turned out to be super useful. This new technology converted all kinds of problems like these, where you might want to find points of solutions to a set of equations, and converted them into problems of locating points of intersection between two curves. And this was a huge deal when it burst onto the scene in the 17th century. It was used to meet all kinds of challenges of the day in astronomy, optics, and navigation. And then, of course, it set the stage for the invention of modern calculus, which so much of the world today depends on. Now imagine what happened next to that revolutionary tool. It became something we could take for granted. It reminds you of middle school and high school math class, right? So the question is, how did we get there? Where an idea that was so revolutionary in the 1600s literally became elementary today. I think the story goes further back, actually, at least some 30 to 80,000 years ago, when anatomically modern humans began to mark up their physical environments, essentially repurposing objects and surfaces in their surroundings into carriers of meaning. I know this session is entitled Cutting Edge Work, and I'm showing you cave art, but I will get there, I promise. What I want to show you all is that when you look at the story of human learning and discovery, the long arc of how humans came to understand the world that we live in, that story is incredibly deeply intertwined with the story of technologies for making the invisible visible. So these are just a few examples from the history of science that I love. We've got Darwin's finches. So only when you see these cases side by side does the kind of biological variation begin to pop out. We've got the telescope resolving the moons around Jupiter, the kind of resolution that Galileo needed to show the world that we may not be at the center of the universe. We've got the telescope. We've got Veronica Hall's drawings of the retina as seen under the microscope, showing us what the different parts of the retina are and how they are hooked up together. And we've got Feynman diagrams in the 20th century to show us subatomic particles coming in and out of existence, events that we would literally never be able to observe with our own eyes. Now, among the most impactful modern technologies for making the invisible visible, I'll argue, was the invention of modern data visualization. Like the telescope and microscope, it helped to resolve parts of the world that we can't see directly. But unlike either, it allows you to see patterns in phenomena that might be too large, or too slow, or too noisy, or to see directly, or that might not be visible at all. It's ubiquitous in the news, it's the cornerstone of evidence-based decision-making in business and government, it's indispensable in science. And what I'm showing you here is one of the first time series plots ever, drawn by William Playfair in 1786 to show the balance of imports and exports from England through over an 80-year period. For a while, imports exceeded exports, but then the relationship flipped in the 1750s when exports took off. So here's the thing. Unlike a drawing of one of Darwin's finches, if you haven't seen one of these kinds of images before, it'd be really difficult to know what you were looking at. But once you learn how, it's a kind of superpower. So many individual observations might be distilled into a single graphic that tells a story that you can read just by looking. This is such an important skill that data visualization literacy has been a mainstay of STEM education for decades and is only becoming more important over time. Yesterday, the New York Times broke a story about recovery from COVID-related learning loss in mathematics, and it looks like across a bunch of states, the orange arrows are there, meaning there's some recovery, but there's still a long way to go. So in a brand new line of work in my lab that I'm super excited about, we're inspired by the question, what role should AI play to meet these challenges in data literacy education? Long story short, we believe that AI teaching assistants and tutors might help one day, but only if these systems themselves can actually perform the tasks that we're asking students to learn how to do, and be able to accurately model how they're learning to perform them. Only by building substantially better cognitive models do I think they'll have any business guiding student learning. So that just raises a really basic question. How would we be able to tell if we were on the right track? The first ingredient is strong metrics. We need concrete ways of measuring data visualization literacy. And the most straightforward way to do that is to show someone a data visualization, then ask them a question about it, and then see what they say. So let's try an example together. Say we're looking at this stacked bar plot, and someone asks you about the cost of peanuts in Las Vegas. Take a moment, see what you think. Say you're given these 4 options to choose from. You can think to yourself, if you thought it was A, you'd be correct. Now, note that one of the bleeding edge AI systems available today reliably reports that the answer is C, $23.40, okay? So that exact question was adapted from one of the test items in VLAT, which is shown here in the middle, which is one of 3 tests of data visualization literacy that we included in a study we literally just completed, so it's truly hot off the presses. We included these 3 tests because they've all been used to measure data visualization literacy in people, and they also had some important differences that we thought complemented one another. Now, when I say we, I should really be saying my extraordinary collaborator, Arnav Verma, who's here today and will be presenting this work in the student poster session, so please go check it out there. With those 3 tests in mind, we then set about administering them in as parallel a manner as possible to both a diverse sample of human participants who had taken at least one high school math class, as well as a suite of state-of-the-art so-called multimodal AI systems capable of operating over images and text inputs that had been claimed as displaying competence on a variety of other visual reasoning tasks. We then recorded not only the overall score achieved by humans and these models, but also the full set of error patterns that they produced. That allowed us to then assess, even when a model or a person gets a question wrong, to see if they were getting things wrong in similar ways. So what did we find? Here I'm going to show you for each of the 3 tests that we included, GGR, VLAT, and HOLF, how well each of these models, so those are the ones that are going to be shown in orange, blue, and red, did compared to how people did, who are going to show up in green. We also happen to subdivide our human participants into participants who've taken less high school math and those who've taken more. First, I want to give you a sense of how well people did on these tests. That's really our benchmark here. There's quite a lot of variability. Each of these dots is a single test item. And here's how all of the models in our model suite did. We have LAVA, 2 variants of BLIP2 Flan T5, as well as GPT-4V. And what we see here is that most of the models are still severely underperforming humans, with GPT-4V much closer to human level on at least 2 of the tests, but still reliably worse. We also analyzed their full error patterns, which can be telling when no one is quite at ceiling, which no one was. After all, while there's only one way to get all of the questions right, there are many ways to get questions wrong. And we found that GPT-4V is still leading the pack on alignment to human error patterns, but a meaningful gap remains. That is, that humans are still more consistent with one another than any models are to any cohort of humans in our sample. So to sum up, I'm really excited about the next generation of AI teaching assistants and tutors, and I think they could have an enormous and transformative impact on STEM education, and that the rapidly advancing capabilities of vision and language models, even over the last year, is really amazing. But we really need rigorous and thorough testing and benchmarking procedures in place to ensure robustness, reliability, and responsible integration of these kinds of systems at the foundation in our learning environments. So thank you to all of my amazing co-authors, and thanks so much to HAI, Stanford Accelerator for Learning, and NSF for supporting this work. All of you for listening. Thanks.
Hi, everyone. My name is Go Wong. I'm an associate professor of music by Curtis Computer Science. I'm also a senior fellow and a faculty associate director at Stanford HAI. I want to tell you a story today about computer music, AI, and something about pedagogy. By way of just an introduction, I guess, a little bit of my origin story is that, much of my life deals around tech. All my degrees are actually in computer science, and I make things with code a lot. Things like programming languages for music, laptop orchestra, this is the Stanford Laptop Orchestra, things in VR. I direct the Stanford VR Design Lab at Karma. Things like ocarina, this is an instrument you blow into your mobile phone, you make music. You can also listen to other people blow into their phones from around the world. In short, I think the thing that unifies the things that I do, that my students do, is that we make things that nobody quite asked for, and that solves no problems that quite exist. Now, the other side of my existence actually is something very different. I'm actually more of someone who prefers the couch, but my partner has very successfully convinced me to go into the great outdoors. And so one of the longer treks we did was actually on the John Muir Trail.
Now for a taste of things to come.
Fuck. Climbing giant fucking piles of rocks. That's a very honest video. And I'm showing you this because actually there was a day on the trail trying to cross Muir Pass. I had to get up. We're 22 days on the trail. Showers are not an option. Mosquitoes are not optional. On that day, it was about 15 days in, 3,000 feet of elevation, a lot of rocks. And get up there, we see the clouds come in, and then we try to outrun the thunderstorm. That did not happen. Instead, we went to Wanda Lake, where I met the most amount of mosquitoes I ever met at one time in my life. And then the thunderstorm started. But it wasn't just rain, it was also hail. And somehow the mosquitoes were still there. But at 5:30, the thunderstorm cleared up. And it was glorious. We saw a double rainbow, got to Evolution Lake, and it was sublime. Now, I'll come back to this tale at the end of my short story. And also, like you know, long ago, the internet was an escape from the real world. Today, the real world seems to be an escape from the internet. And The next part of my story goes to the course I'm teaching, a course that actually I will need to also teach today in about half an hour. Somehow I'm going to teleport to Karma by 10:30 to actually teach this course, and it's our music and AI course here, and it's a critical making course, meaning it's part critical thinking, part making, right? Lecture 1 begins, is this even a good idea? Referring both to applying AI to music, as well as probably teaching this course. It's a very self-examining course. Students from all kinds of backgrounds. It turned out all of us had some form of AI FOMO. I guess if you're sitting here, some of you, maybe many of you, might have AI FOMO as well. But we do try to say that questions greater than answer, right? As James Baldwin once wrote, the purpose of art is to lay bare the questions that have been hidden by the answers. And the question I think we really asked throughout is, what do we really want from it all? Because I think every AI system that we build ends up actually being an argument for how we might actually want to live with AI, right? In a cultural context, in a social context, in an educational context. Do we want big red buttons, or do we want something more? And maybe it's not an either or, but maybe an and or, right? If you just think about the music, all the different ways you can interact with instruments, this is just a few of them. And it reminds me of the tenet 3 of Stanford HI, which is all applications should try to augment human capabilities, not replace them. I want to show you some student work in this course. First one was they have to use this is actually using vectorized words to actually create kind of like a interactive poem generator, except they actually have to interact with this. Here's
Time division.
Storm Fury.
Time division. Time division. Time division.
What does it mean?
Shield.
Poetry.
Shield.
It's got a beat.
Shield.
And eventually, things get really crazy. I don't know how it is. Even in this, I think we began to think about, actually there's a lot more to AI than prompt-based and generative in this age of generative. We have to wonder, as we begin framing educational questions in terms of what can we do with education with foundation models, generative models, prompt-based models, we have to wonder the ways we interact with these models, right? As we get better at doing that, what other muscles might atrophy? And how do we attend to both of these, right? To take advantage of one without losing the other. Another assignment is actually one called Wekinator World, using the Wekinator. In this programming A2, you're to use Wekinator to create 3 interactive AI utilities and toys in your everyday life. These don't have to be useful. In fact, whimsical is good, absurd is good, playful is wonderful. This is the work of Dr. Rebecca Feebrink, who is one of the world's experts on machine learning, HCI, and music. And Wekinator basically is an interactive machine learning, supervised learning system. It's actually quite, at this point, it's like more than a decade old, but it's an oldie but a goodie. And with this, you can actually train simple things. By the way, that's all it does. So about waves to you. All right? But you can train this in like 3 minutes. We like to say you can do a lot with a lot of data. You can do a lot with not a lot of data. It's a kind of a rhyme we do in class. Here's what some of our students did. Here's one with a rather clickbait title. That's all it does. In the reflection for this, Matt said, I really enjoyed this assignment. I think it's easy to adopt this toxic capitalistic mindset that everything you do or make has to be productive or for something. But when we follow that dogma, we forget to make beautiful things just because they're beautiful, do funny things just because they're funny, or make stupid projects just because they're stupid. There's so much beauty in doing things just because. It was nice to take a pause on life and make something just for the sake of making it and for a grade, but that's more of an afterthought. This is a hand to voice. This is also created with Wekinator. It's an instrument. It's quite expressive. What did we learn from this? Actually, surprising a lot through this course last year. One, I think it was kind of a therapy for our own AI FOMO. When all the students saw one another make these incredibly creative projects, we thought about a lot of words that begin with the letter A, like accountability, authorship, authenticity, accuracy, aesthetics, and then a T word, transparency. The course also became it's a critical making course. So it became a kind of running commentary about ourselves, about AI, and how we learn about AI. For example, here at Stanford. And we thought, really, actually maybe AI in education should be more than about intelligence, but something we might call wisdom. If intelligence is something we might define as possessing the means to achieve what you desire, then we might say wisdom could be the capacity to critically evaluate your desires in the first place, and also to evaluate the means that you have to achieve them. What if students were given the capacity to gain tools for both? That would be nice. And basically, I have no answers. These only questions. And I come to you today in a continual crisis of faith about it all. I was a computer science major, and now I was a computer science PhD. And I'm really wondering, what are we doing with AI? What should we be doing? What do we really want from it? Because that is not an easy question to answer, especially in this time when Ava she turned 1 month old 3 days ago, my first child. And thank you. Wow. I can take some credit, but not a lot. I have to wonder, as she grow up, what kind of world is she going to be growing up into? And this E word, education. What kind of system or systems will she be a part of? And what can we do as parents to actually help her with this? And I'll end with a few questions, right? And this is my crisis questions that have continued for years into this very day. Question number 1, what if, for music, what if the whole point of it was that we make it ourselves? If the fear is, as artists, we might be replaced. But actually, all the artists I know don't just fear that. Yes, there's fear of that, but I think the fear isn't just being replaced, but being replaced by something that's far more generic and far less interesting. But that we might be okay with it because maybe generic is good enough to monetize and make somebody a lot of money. And that we end up with a culture, a world where all the things we have are often serviceable, even competent, but perhaps rarely or maybe even never sublime. The fear is that we might be entering into an age of generic. Second question, what if being confused and frustrated is an essential part of learning anything? Right, and I think, as Dean Schwartz so wisely said at the beginning, it's basically what things should be efficient, what things should not, and how do we make things that need to be more efficient, and perhaps how to keep the things that should not be efficient, not efficient. I'm kind of paraphrasing, but those were visionary words that Dean Schwartz has spoken. Third point. What if all things worthwhile are mountains to climb? That's my question, and that's a question I would leave. That's a question actually I have for myself, but I would leave for all of you, and that goes back to that. You could have probably helicopter dropped me to the top of Evolution Lake, and it would have been a good photo moment. It would have been pretty. But man, that mosquitoes, the thunderstorm getting up there, I wouldn't trade that. As much suffering as that felt like. Because you know what? You grow with that. You learn with that. You learn something about yourself with that, right? So, anyway, I have no answers, only questions. And I think the question is, what do we really want from it all? Thank you.
Thank you to our all amazing 4 panelists, and I will turn to the audience with some questions here that I'm seeing appear on the laptop, but also to live audience questions in a moment. But I will start with one
that I think is at the core of what we heard. It seems to me that there is a little bit of a tensions that we heard from our four researchers here around efficiency and this future that we are all looking to build together. Is it really efficiency only, or what do we want from AI, as Ger really nicely stated? So with that, maybe I will ask Emma first to comment on that question. And I think we have another
think
mic.
it
Hold
is
on.
still on.
Is your mic still on?
Are they still
Yeah.
on?
Okay.
Okay, good. So first of all, I loved hearing all the other conversations and discussions people just had about their work. I think in some ways there's a lot of alignment over this idea of saying we want education to empower people to be able to achieve their dreams. And so we want to make sure that we can use the educational system to give them skills and knowledge and opportunities to do that. And I think efficiency may be part of that, because I think that if we want people to still be able to innovate and make breakthroughs, and at least for those who want to choose those paths, there will still be a lot of foundational skills that I think are really important to acquire. And so I think efficiency in that is important because, for example, as Judy eloquently put, we have an incredible history of things like mathematics and knowledge that we've built up over centuries. And we can consolidate that to some extent, but we still have a lot of skills that students need to learn. And so I think while we're wrestling with the questions of how that's changing in the new era, we still do care about efficiency in that if people can acquire those skills effectively and in an engaging way, that's really important. But we also want to make sure that these systems empower people to be able to choose those ultimate directions, as we were just hearing of, what is the final goal people have, whether it's to make something sublime or make something whimsical. And so make sure they have the foundations to do that, but then the opportunities to pursue it.
Judy? Yeah.
Can I build on those really excellent points from Emma just now? Thinking about the connections and complementarity between the different comments that we had, I really do, I'm sympathetic to the view that building a strong foundation of skills gives learners the kind of fluency that they need in order to be as creative and empowered as they can. Being able to multiply single-digit numbers, to take one classic example, really unlocks new worlds of mathematical reasoning that wouldn't be possible if that were something that you had to delegate or had to, there were a lot of friction in those steps. So I think that it is important in this new era to think about what we really care about, what the ultimate goals of our formal education systems, ways of closing the motivation gap between many learners and what we have on offer in the classroom. But I also really believe in having really strong foundations that are able to condense a lot of the intelligence and wisdom that humanity has collectively acquired over centuries and millennia.
Yeah, I think to just complement the focus on learners, I think there are two questions to me that are really big in terms of the efficiency discussion. One is, for teachers, do they want it? If efficiency means they now will suddenly have to serve 150 students instead of 30 students, will they want that? They already, burnout is already a big problem. And just as we see in the history of the world, efficiency doesn't always mean it's going to lead to better life and work conditions for the people whose work is being made more efficient. So we really need to ask that question. And another question for me is a trade-off. Like, yes, I completely agree that for learners, I think being able to learn the skills efficiently is really important. But there are just some things that I agree with Gid too. You cannot think about as a function of efficiency, like relationship building. Sure, I think it's great if the teacher can save time in writing an email to parents or to develop a lesson plan. But when it comes to the time they spend with the students and the time they dedicate to those relationships, that I think cannot be a function of efficiency. So I think it's just a very complex question.
Yeah, some things I definitely want to be more efficient. Like I would totally be okay if like a robot went in my place to like the next faculty meeting, or maybe all faculty meetings. And there's some things that, you know, and I do love my colleagues, but still, okay with a robot. And there's some things that I think I do value as foundational kind of things to learn, right? And but then I think about kind of AI as thinking about like a domain specific thing, because the question of what do we really want from it is actually, it's never a simple question. It's a question I think we can keep asking, but also it's a question to which I would say, I don't know, and it depends. And one of the things it depends on is the actual domain. I think we'd want different things from AI, say in the domains of climate science or various medical practices. But that's a very different can of worms when you say, what do we want from AI in like music or creative expression? And then there's education, which to me at times feel like kind of both. There's a practical component to education, then there's a kind of like intrinsically like rewarding and I would say sublime aspect to education. I think both on the part of educators, there's a craft to being a good educator, and I think there's a craft to learn how to learn as a student, right? And I think, how do we build tools, but not really build tools that directly does things, but build tools that create environments in which educators and learners can, I don't know, like strive for these moments of the sublime, right? And in learning for me, a lot of time it's like for students, as a student, I think it's actually when you worked hard at something, really got confused, you practice at it, you got good, and then you learn something about the thing, you learn something about yourself, and there's this moment of clarity. And you feel empowered, but more than that, you feel like you see things better, clearer than before. And I think as an educator, I think it's providing an environment for that, and to see your students actually have these moments. Anyway, so.
Yeah, beautiful. So we have a question that came here from actually some of our students from Professor Elam's class, which is about equity. So the question is, have the speakers considered integrating scholarship on decolonial AI, feminist AI, and disability activism, and AI into their thinking about AI and education? So broadly, different themes on equity and your work.
I can
Thank you.
briefly mention this afternoon in a different session, I'll be sharing some ideas that I've been developing with some colleagues here at Stanford that I'm really excited about, that are about building rich multimodal interactions with AI agents to explore data, as you might imagine, that are really intended from the very get-go to promote equity and accessibility. These interfaces are intended to be multimodal, but multimodal in a much richer sense than I was using the term in my talk just a few minutes ago. Not only supporting interactions through language and images, but also tactile interfaces and auditory interfaces for blind and low vision learners who still face really steep difficulties in fully participating in STEM fields, but have so much to contribute. And so that's been work that I've been super excited about to pursue with colleagues Chris Potts and Lisa Kreis and others. Stay tuned this afternoon if you want to hear more about that.
I think that there are two aspects of my work that try to address that problem. One is just, which I discussed too, is we are really trying to build up these technologies in a practitioner and teacher-centered way. So I think that that the goal of that is really the decolonization of these technologies, as we are not trying to build these from the ivory tower. We are really from the get-go, we are building it with the teachers, and through every single step of the way they are involved in the process. And what helps also is some of my students are former teachers. Like I see Jim here, who has been, a middle school teacher, who was a middle school teacher before being a PhD student and taught for decades and still teaching the STEP course for math teachers here at Stanford. So really helps to have that perspective to make sure we are not imposing and we are building things that are important. And then the other is keeping certain populations of learners and students in mind. So most of our projects are focused on students who are traditionally underserved, like the project that's led by Rose around math remediation is serving Title I schools for students who are 3 grade levels behind their kind of expected math progress. So they're the ones who are on this tutoring platform, and that's kind of a common theme that we are trying to support those learners. And we are starting a new project that focuses on multilingual students, because I think that's a huge problem that we hear all the time in the US. And my colleague Brian Brown and with other colleagues, we are trying to build tools for math and science to support teachers in supporting multilingual students.
Yeah, in our work, there's also been a big focus on trying to partner in school districts where there's a lot of students that are struggling or behind, or where there's a lot less resources. And then, like the example I gave before, to think about how the AI technologies can help close that gap, or at least make sure that they're all supporting students of where they're at, and that we're not sort of having ceiling or floor effects where people can't benefit from the technology. For example, a lot of students unfortunately struggle to read, and if you struggle to read sufficiently, you can't do math word problems because you can't read them. And so in some of my collaborations right now, people have also been starting to think about how do we, automatically change the reading level, or how can we do things to make sure that we're helping support students with math when they may have other challenges, or, not have had the opportunity to reach the levels of literacy that are needed to participate and get benefit from the math software.
I think we're out of time. I'll just say this is an excellent question. I don't know, and it depends.
So I'm going to take liberty for asking one question from the audience, because we are already like right on time. But I wanted to make sure we had at least one live audience question. So if someone is brave enough to raise their hand and for one live question, that would be great.
Hi. Almost all the examples you presented are for cognitive learning cognitive content of some kind. How about AI for learning a skill that is a physical skill, like playing tennis or speaking spontaneously?
Talk a little bit about this. I can first cite some really amazing work by my colleague Dorsa Sadiq. They've been doing some really cool work on how do you do something for teaching physical tasks, whether something like physical therapy or learning to play tennis, where you could get automatic feedback, sort of like have your own coach, so it can analyze that, it can break skills up, and then from your physical demonstrations give you feedback. So I think that's an amazing example. In another case, in a collaboration with Dan and Jeremy Balesman and others, we've been thinking about using AI for soft skills. So for example, how could you teach people to give challenging feedback to an employee? And we use virtual reality to do this. And I think I've done it. And one of the things that's really interesting about it is you give feedback to an avatar. And then as part of the training, you switch roles. So you see an avatar give your feedback to you and experience that as the employee, which is very educational. So I think there's a huge role to do this for sort of soft skills and for physical tasks.
Well, thank you. Please join me to thank our amazing panelists and really inspiring. Thank you.